What's on your radar, Kim?
Well, yesterday, during a visit to Cleveland, Ohio, President Biden spoke to a group of union workers about his pension guarantees. But during his 15-minute speech, he said a couple of eye-raising things regarding the economy. Biden blames inflation on Putin and says he's calling for a federal gas tax holiday, but Republicans are blocking it. Let's watch.
And that's why what we're doing here is so important. Let me close with this. We made incredible progress on the economy from where we were a year and a half ago. We got a long way to go because of inflation, because of I call it the Putin tax increase. Putin because of gasoline and all that grain he's keeping from being able to get to the market. Now I'm fighting like hell to lower costs on things that you talk about around your kitchen table. My dad used to say at the end of the day, it's just when you sit at that table, do you have enough money to pay for everything you need? Not a lot over. Do you have enough money to pay for everything you need? Well, Republicans do nothing to obstruct our efforts to lower your gas taxes. I propose that. I've asked the Congress to eliminate the federal gas tax.
All right. So first of all, Russia isn't causing the inflation. It's sanctions on Russia that are contributing to the higher prices. But the war doesn't even explain it because inflation was here before the war and it's going to be here after the war. Last year in 2021, before the war was even a thought, the U.S. saw skyrocketing inflation of 7%. Now compare that to the previous 9 years in a row, which saw the highest rate of 2.3 in 2019. The only thing the administration can do is blame it on Putin, since they have no other explanation for why there is so much record inflation. And truth is, they don't know what's causing it. The Fed is scrambling to control it, but can't. And their only play is to blame Putin and hope voters buy it and embrace it. Problem is, people are starting to wonder if sticking it to Putin is worth not being able to put gas in the car and food on the table. Voters aren't exactly buying the whole, this is wartime and we all need to do our part narrative. But again, even if Biden were to end the support for Ukraine today, inflation would still be here and then he'd have no one to blame. So he's thinking, might as well just keep blaming it on Putin. Now about the gas tax. Biden has proposed a 3-month federal gas tax holiday during the summer months, but it isn't just Republican lawmakers who are skeptical of it, so are Democrats. Current federal gas tax is 18.4 cents per gallon. In previous state, but not federal, gas tax holidays, oil companies only passed about 70% of that on to the consumer. But when it comes to federal gas tax, analysts say the savings will be even lower because they doubt oil companies will truly pass it along. They're saying it would only be a mere couple of pennies savings on the dollar, and that isn't enough to feel relief when prices are $5 a gallon. But it's a nice talking point. Biden doesn't stop there. During his speech, he also claims before he got into office, people were waiting in long lines just to put a box of food in their trunks. Watch this.
You all remember what the economy was like when I was elected, a country in a pandemic with no real plans how to get out of it, millions of people out of their jobs, families in cars, remember, backed up for literally miles, waiting for a box of food to be put in their trunk, just a box of food to be put in their trunk because they didn't have enough to eat. Previous administration lost more jobs in its watch than any administration since Herbert Hoover. That's a fact. All based on failed trickle-down economics that benefit the wealthiest Americans and hit the middle class and working people the hardest. But we came in with a fundamentally different economic vision, an economy that grows from the bottom up and the middle out. It's good for everyone because when the middle class does well, the poor of a ladder up and the wealthy still do very well.
I mean, listen, Robbie and Ole, I understand that Biden might have some memory lapses here and there, but that last one, to say that it was trickle-down economics that caused the loss of jobs before he came into office, does he not remember the pandemic and the shutdowns and all of the Democrats who were screaming, lose your job, it's better than losing your life, stop complaining about it? They were the ones that were forcing businesses to close down. I live in the state of California. We were under very harsh lockdowns for a very long time. Compare that to Republican states that were wanting to open up, like Florida, Ron DeSantis wanting to open things up. And he was criticized by Democrats, saying that he was a mass murderer, that he was going to be killing the people in his state. And so we ended up with, all these Democrats calling for lockdowns, calling for loss of jobs, saying it's better than your loss of life. Biden doesn't seem to remember that. And by the way, everybody got COVID anyway. So what's going on here?
Yep. Yeah, I wish, someone who just wants government to leave me alone, I wish Republican governments would leave me alone more than they do. Democratic governments never leave you alone. It's a party right now beholden to the principle that we will make our voters, we will make our supporters, the working class, we will make them sacrifice for the greater good, and we will define what the greater good is. And we will change from moment to moment as fits, whatever the elites think is best. And we saw that during the pandemic, what everything you just said happened. And then with the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, where Biden has continuously said, well, look, we just, we're at war, so we have to sacrifice, and we just got to kind of deal with it. And the voters are saying, no, we didn't agree to that. We didn't give you the authority to do this. No one took a vote, and we're suffering. And you can't just the Democrats are just going to lose to the extent they always expect everyone to sacrifice. It doesn't affect them because they're elites, the party leadership, the celebrities, that kind of class. But the voters are turning away from Democrats because they don't want to do it. They can't do it. Many of them can't do it. They can't afford to pay higher prices and all the rest of it. So it's the continuity, I think, from the lockdown mindset to the COVID mindset to the Ukraine conflict mindset and going forward. It's always like, well, sorry, we just have to do this. Sorry if you drive a truck or if you have a small business or whatever your deal is, or you don't want to get vaccinated, but you have you're in a federal employment requires it now, or whatever else it is. It doesn't seem like it seems wrong and also a bad tactical strategy.
Well, we talked about it earlier, and I agree with a lot of the criticism in terms of the discourse around Ukraine and Russia and how that's affecting inflation. All these things are not being honest enough, and I don't think they're doing enough to incorporate what is the sentiment of the average person in America. So I'll give you all that. As far as COVID, I'll be reasonable. First, I want to remind us, Donald Trump was president. He was president at the time when we got our initial lockdowns and stuff. And I do think, people were dying. The pandemic was very serious. It was an unprecedented issue. So I would give Republicans or Democrats and everybody, I would give everybody a lot more grace in terms of trying to figure out how to respond to that and how to avoid deaths and massive deaths. We're at a different place now in terms of how we see and perceive the pandemic. But at the time, I think it was very reasonable and justified wanting the lockdowns. And I still think it was a pretty reasonable argument to say, yes, loss of businesses or loss of employment, these different things are going to happen as a result of trying to take the proper safety precautions because of COVID. I also think on both sides, I do think the Biden administration did not do enough to supplement that. I think, they had promised COVID relief checks immediately that they reneged on an amount. I don't think they did enough to stimulate the economy to make up for what were the losses in terms of trying to take these COVID precautions. But as far as overall doing it, I didn't have an issue with the lockdowns. But I do think they could engage in the rhetoric more honestly. I think it's important, and it's not just Biden doing. I see this from a lot of politicians talking about all of the results of COVID or the results of the lockdowns without really taking that into account. And I think it probably would benefit Biden to say that. I think there are a lot of people that would still be sympathetic to that understanding. Like, okay, we were in the pandemic. These are the fallouts of that, and let's work on it. But I understand where both of you are coming from on this issue, actually.
I mean, in terms of the lockdowns, and I think you probably feel somewhat similarly, Kim, it was one thing the way it was initially sold. It said, we don't understand this disease. We're very worried our hospitals are immediately about to be overwhelmed. We need a little bit of time to get testing in place. So we're doing a 15-day pause on everything. And I said, okay, I guess I understand that. I don't love it, but I understand that. And then that morphed into an indefinite suspension of all professional and social activity until there would be vaccines. And then even when there were vaccines, they continued past that. So now I'll never give the government the benefit of the doubt again after that. They said they said they were going to take an inch. We said, okay, then they took a mile. And it just, to me, it speaks to the credibility. But you're right that was under Trump. Yes. We can't lay that at the feet of Joe Biden. And I think actually Trump burned a lot of credibility with his supporters for doing a lot of the exact same things that Democrats would do. But what do you think, Kim?
I mean, I understand that Trump was president, but he was actually vocally calling for states to open up, and people were criticizing him over that, saying, oh, he's a mass murderer, like what they were saying about Ron DeSantis when Trump said, oh, everybody should be able to celebrate Easter. Everybody was very upset about that. the lockdowns were state by state, and they were even then beyond that, often municipality by municipality. So I don't think we could blame the president at all, whether it be Trump or Biden, for the lockdowns. That was a Republican-Democrat issue on a local level. And it was Democrat areas that decided to implement the harshest of the lockdowns and the mandates. So that is something his party owns. It's not something Biden has to own, but it's also not something Trump owns either. That is a party-wide issue. Democrats were calling for lockdowns. The base was calling for those lockdowns. I personally was never in favor of them. There was enough science and enough data out there already by the time the virus hit the United States that we knew that young people were not at risk for COVID, for serious COVID outcomes. That has not changed throughout the pandemic. The average age of death is still in the 80s. For COVID. It's a disease that definitely we should be protective of our elderly. I've got several 90-year-old something grandparents, very protective of them. But that, but Biden though now, and look, I'm a big critic of trickle-down economics. They do not work. I totally agree with Biden on that doesn't work, but that's not the reason why people were in endless long lines waiting for food to be put in the trunk of their car. That was because Democrats demanded those people lost their jobs. They demanded that they were shut down and that their restaurants had to close, that they weren't allowed to go to work. And then they ended up in those long food lines. So, for him to say it's trickle down economics and that's the reason for it and not willing to put any blame whatsoever on his party, that to me is,
In fairness to Democrats, they didn't just call for, lockdowns and these measures for safety. They also called for, in conjunction with that, they wanted governmental support. They wanted the government to support these businesses. They wanted to see the government support individual people so that people were able to protect themselves and, stay out of work and do these different things. And as someone who was in New York City, and I stayed in New York City the entire time of the pandemic, never fled, we were hit extremely hard. We're a big city. We're stacked on top of each other. We saw quadruple the rates of COVID in the hospital, and our hospitals were debilitated as a result of COVID. So it's not just that, Democrats and these local politicians in these places just wanted to do it for arbitrary sake. We were experiencing very, very serious impact of that. And they were aware and they were cognizant of the fact that there would be people who would lose their jobs or that people couldn't afford to be out of work in these different things. And they did call for the government to issue stimulus and help with that. So that's my only add-on.
Cuomo, he did such a great job there in that state of New York, didn't he? He had nothing to do with that stockpile of deaths that ended up happening in those nursing homes. Nothing at all. Was it Democrat Cuomo?
Kim, if you want to talk about Cuomo, trust me, I'm right here with you one day. We could do that.
And not just Cuomo, was done in other states, but Cuomo got most of the attention. But there's some accusations against the governor of my former state, Michigan, Governor Whitmer.
Right, Michigan.
Right after her kidnapping. All right, Kim, thank you so much. We'll be back with more Rising in just a minute.